If we designate our being as being different from our owning, we attribute a certain kind of value and standard of value to our contents of life. If one interprets those that lie close to the enigmatic center of the ego as our being and the more remote ones as our owning, then their arrangement in this series, excluding, of course, any sharp demarcation, is only produced through the diversity of feelings of value that accompanies both of them. If in any transaction we allocate what we give away to our being and what we receive to our owning, then this is only an indirect expression of the fact that we have exchanged a more intensive, more durable sense of value which permeates the whole sphere of life for a more direct, urgent and momentary one. Money and the ideal of distinction. If the sale of personal values implies a diminution of this specific being in the sense used here and the direct opposite of self-respect, then we may term a personal ideal which can serve as a decisive yardstick for those modes of behavior one of distinction, Bornheimite. This value is decisive because it signifies the most radical criterion in money matters. Measured against it, prostitution, marriage for money and bribery are the extreme points of a series that commences with the most legitimate forms of money transactions. To explain this phenomenon we have first to define the concept of distinction itself. The usual division of our objective norms of valuation into logical, ethical and aesthetic norms is quite incomplete when viewed in the light of our practical judgments. To take a very striking example, we value the distinct formation of individuality, the mere fact that a personality possesses a specific and concise form and power. We experience as valuable the incomparability and uniqueness with which a person represents, as it were, only his own idea as valuable to us, often indeed in contrast to the ethical and aesthetic inferiority of the content of such a phenomenon. We are interested not in the completion of that system of norms but rather in pointing out that the systematic approach as such is just as erroneous here as it is with regard to the 5 senses or the 12 Kantian categories of reason. The development of our species continuously creates new possibilities for responding to the world both sensually and intellectually and new categories for evaluating it. And just as we constantly form new and effective ideals, so our growing consciousness discloses ever new ones of which we were unconscious, even though they were already effective. I believe that among the senses of value with which we respond to phenomena there is one that we can characterize only as the evaluation of distinction. The independence of this category is indicated in the fact that it emerges in connection with phenomena of a totally different kind and value, with ways of thinking as well as works of art, with lineal descent as well as literary style, with highly developed taste just as much as with the corresponding objects, with the manners of high society as well as an animal of noble stock. All these we may term distinguished. Even though this value bears some relationship to those of morality and beauty, it remains essentially independent of them since it appears to the same degree in combination with very varied ethical and aesthetic levels. The social meaning of distinction such as an exceptional position set apart from a majority, the separation of the individual phenomenon within its autonomous area, which would be immediately destroyed by the intrusion of any heterogeneous element, all this obviously provides the model for all the concept's applications. The actual bearer of the value of distinction establishes a quite specific kind of distinction. On the one hand, the distinction accentuates the positive exclusion of being interchangeable, of the reduction to a common denominator and of common activity. On the other, the distinction should not be so conspicuous as to entice what is distinguished away from its independence, its reserve and its inner self-containment and to transpose its essence into a relationship to others, be it only a relationship of difference. The distinguished person is the very person who completely reserves his personality. Distinction represents a quite unique combination of senses of differences that are based upon and yet reject any comparison at all. It seems to me that a conclusive example is that the House of Lords not only is recognized to be the sole judge of each of its members, but in 1330 it explicitly rejected the suggestion that it should sit in judgment on persons other than peers, so that even an authority relationship to persons other than of its own rank was interpreted as degradation. Yet the more money dominates interests and sets people and things into motion, the more objects are produced for the sake of money and are valued in terms of money, the less can the value of distinction be realized in men and in objects. Various historical phenomena point to this negative connection. The ancient aristocracies of Egypt and India detested maritime trade and considered it to be incompatible with the purity of the castes. Like money, the ocean is a mediator, it is the geographical version of the means of exchange. In itself it is completely characterless and therefore, just like money, it is utilizable for the interaction of the most diversified things. Ocean traffic and money transactions are historically very close, and the reserve and rigid exclusiveness of the aristocracy has to fear a wearing away and leveling from both phenomena. Thus, at the heights of aristocratic rule, trade was forbidden to the Venetian aristocracy, and only in 1784 did a law authorize noblemen to trade under their own name. Previously they could do so only as sleeping partners of the business of the cittadini, that is at a distance and under cover. In Thebes there once existed a law that only allowed those who had not participated in any market transactions for 10 years to be eligible for state offices. Augustus prohibited the senators from participating in customs monopolies and in shipping trade. If Ranke characterizes the 14th and 15th centuries of German history as the plebeian age, then this refers to the emergent conditions of a money economy that are represented by the cities that were antagonistic to the traditional aristocracy. Already at the beginning of the early modern period in England, it was found that the differences in wealth prevailing in the city could never produce such a decisively closed aristocracy as did the barriers between the estates in the country. The poorest apprentice could hope for a prosperous future if this future lay only in money ownership, whereas a completely rigid line separated landed aristocracy from the yeomanry. The existence of the infinite, quantitative grading of money ownership permits the levels to merge into one another and removes the distinctive formations of aristocratic classes which cannot exist without secure boundaries. As with the aesthetic ideal that I mentioned earlier, so the ideal of distinction is indifferent to quantitative evaluation. The question of quantity completely recedes when faced with the secluded detachment of the value that is conveyed in its participating essence. The purely qualitative significance of this ideal is relatively unaffected by whether more instances achieve this level or not. What is decisive is that life has succeeded in accomplishing distinction, and to be its single valid representative in itself gives the specific character to the distinguished being, whether human or subhuman. Yet at that moment at which things that are viewed according to their money value are so evaluated, they are removed from the realms of this category, their qualitative value is subordinated to their quantitative value and their total independence, the dual relationship to others and to itself that we experience on a certain level as distinction has lost its basis. The essence of prostitution, which we recognized in money, is imparted to the objects that function exclusively as its equivalent, perhaps to a more noticeable degree because they have more to lose than money is able to. That extreme opposite of the category of distinction, doing things in common with others, sich machen, becomes the typical relationship of objects in a money economy because all things are connected by means of money as through a central station, all float with the same specific gravity in the constantly moving current of money, and all, since they are on the same level, are distinguished only by the size of the pieces that they cover. The tragic consequence of any leveling process inescapably takes effect where the higher level is pulled down to a greater extent than the lower level can be raised. This is obvious in the relationship between people. Where an area of communication is formed, particularly of an intellectual kind in which a majority of people find understanding and common ground, the standards must be considerably closer to the person of the lowest than of the highest level. For it is always easier for the latter to descend than it is for the former to ascend.